so much fun the first time.
Likewise.
Thank you. Just for those of our viewers who are sort of just tuning in and just figuring out what's happening, I will give a little preface here. We are University Presbyterian Church, and we are doing a series right now called Conversations for the Common Good, where we are exploring important issues that are affecting our city. And we're doing that by interviewing people who are doing work in those areas and people who are our local experts. I love getting to call you that, which I mean, I think it is accurate, but that's why it feels like a privilege to get to sit and talk with you. And I think it's so important to be able to hear from your experience and also about the work that you're doing. So do you want to just briefly share what organization you work for, Dympna, and what you do there?
Yes, at the moment, I'm an editor with FresnoLand, which is a lab at the Fresno Bee. And as editor, I do a lot of, what editors do, which is guide, kind of coach, edit. But also in our case, I'm what is called a working editor, meaning that I also write. And so in that capacity, I'm able to explore some of the issues that impact our Fresno community.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
Fresno Land is a lab at the B, which is funded by philanthropy, and which, by the way, does not in any way affect the editorial content, but it is funded by people who have certain goals and who would like us to kind of delve into certain areas that are often not written about. And so we focus on issues of land and water and housing and communities, the various neighborhoods and communities, as well as the issue of inequalities within our own Fresno area.
Mm-hmm. And the series Fresno Voices, which you've been contributing to about the stories of Black people living in Fresno, um, and really the story of racial inequality in Fresno, uh,
Yes.
has been one of the things that you have been working on that has impacted me as I have been reading those stories. So thank
Yeah. Oh, you're quite welcome. After the George Floyd um, murder, the Fresno Bee, as happened in many newsrooms across the country, really started asking internally, kind of challenging everyone to delve deeper, to look around us and look at stories that may fit into telling the story of Black America.
you.
And so I decided to look at our Fresno communities and first of all look at the economic opportunities that exist. And of course, once you start, you're just overwhelmed by the imbalance, the inequities, the unemployment, the wage gap, um, the underemployment, and then you look at some of the resources that exist in various neighborhoods that help create employment, and you realize how there's so much disinvestment in the areas that are mostly populated by people of color. And of course, without the kind of purposeful investment, that's why there's such disparity in the quality and the standard of living. And then we look at how it impacts other areas of life, like health, for instance, educational attainment, and also even areas of crime and and social justice. It's all interconnected,
Mm-hmm.
and they all affect each other.
Mm-hmm. And one thing is because Fresno is so, well, not just Fresno, but most of America, but Fresno is incredibly segregated. And
Yes.
so for those of us who live here, um, like we have to work to understand this,
Yeah.
and to know the story, to know to like hear these stories because it's not naturally how we're living. And so that's why hearing and listening to these stories is so valuable and important for me. And I have to tell you, so I did receive a number of questions about your interview this morning. So there was an initial interview this morning where you shared with us. And for those of you, if anyone's watching that hasn't seen that, that is available on our church website, upcfresno.org. But you shared a little bit about your story, and most of the questions I've received so far were people wanting to hear more of your story. And so I wonder if it would be all right to ask you some more questions about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, you shared in the interview that that after moving to the U.S. when you were 18, you told me it took you 4 years to realize that you were Black. And then
Yeah.
you talk further about like how you really sort of made an effort to like learn about what that means in America. And I received a question from someone who wants to know if you would share what it felt like to go through that realization, and to learn about that.
Yes, thank you very much. I came to America right when I was 17, not quite 18, and went to college. And I went to an all-women's college where I was maybe one of a handful of Black students. And when you come from a culture or society where everyone is Black, race is irrelevant. I never really saw myself as I mean, what's the right word? As belonging to a race.
Hmm.
You're just a person.
Hmm.
But then in our culture, gender was more the issue because there was such a huge gap between the way men were treated and the way women were treated. And we had other issues. In Africa, we may have what they call tribalism, the different tribes fighting. But race wasn't one of those things. So when I came to America, I never saw race really. And it's funny because when I look at it, I look back and I think, obviously I must have known that I was Black, but it never configured into the way I saw myself. And so went through undergraduate, and I remember having a conversation with a Black student who was in one of the classes that I was in, and she had missed class. And I reminded her to come to class, and she said to me, "Well, they'll still figure a way to fail me." And she says, "They won't fail you, Dympna. You talk funny. You don't rub them the wrong way." Right? And I thought the girl's name was Yolanda, thinking, like, what is she talking about? And she says to me, "You don't get it." Okay. And I didn't.
Hmm.
So when I went off to do my master's a few years later, sitting in the student lounge with another student that was doing my master's degree with me, she was a white girl, and we were interviewing two girls from Ethiopia. And this was about the turmoils going on in Ethiopia. It was right after their Haile Selassie, their president, was assassinated, or maybe he was overthrown. And we were interviewing the students, and another student in our program stopped by our table and laughed or chuckled and said to Janelle, the white girl, said, "Janelle, you are outnumbered. You and three Black girls." And then everybody laughed and we went back to what we were doing. But I was stuck for a minute. And while the conversation was going on with one part of my mind, the other part just was saying, what does he mean? Three Black girls. Who are the three Black girls? I knew and I saw the Ethiopian girls were Black. And I knew that Janelle was white. And I kept saying, who is the third Black girl? Who was he talking about? And I really, literally had to look at myself and said, oh my God, I am Black, you know? And I talk about that period as when I came of age in America, because there I was, I guess, a bumbling fool, just going around raceless, classless, going on as if nothing on earth was um, could stand in my way. But
Mm-hmm.
the minute I saw myself as black, immediately my world changed. It didn't. In other words, it's like I was the same apartment that I lived in that day that I went back to. I was still in the master's program that I was doing. My career path was still going the same direction, but my outlook on life. Okay, mind you, I'm talking about the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Things were not really that glorious for anyone, certainly not for Black America. And I think that putting myself in that category, this is what you are. This is really all you are, And I felt that is, I had to struggle past it. And then every time I went into a store, I saw it through that lens. If somebody said, "I see your driver's license," when I wrote a check, it was like, is he asking because I'm black? Whereas I never saw it before. If people looked at me the wrong way, immediately it went back to, is it about my race? And eventually, even though I had many opportunities at that point to stay here after I finished my master's in journalism, I decided I would go back to Nigeria because I felt that I was so unprepared to be black. I didn't have the background. And while I knew how to navigate my way through a culture that was sexist, I did not know how to be black in America. And I knew that I would fail regardless, whether it was from the white people looking at me and expecting certain things that I certainly didn't possess, or even from Black America looking at me and expecting things that I knew that I could not deliver. I realized I was better off going back to Nigeria at that point.
Yeah, it's awful to. I mean, I'm glad that you're sharing this, but just to hear about that burden and like that's why you went back.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Um, you also shared about, so you were talking about this like idea of these expectations, right? And you'd said before, like you said that there are actually different expectations, the expectations from white people and the expectations from Black people.
Yes.
Um, do you think you could articulate what you felt that those were?
Yes. Many, many times when you're completing a form and you're supposed to choose your African American, you're black, you're this, I always paused
Mm,
before I chose one because I just felt my experience about being black is very, very limited.
mm,
And I don't know, sometimes I felt it wasn't fair to claim an experience that I really didn't live,
mm,
right? And for example, when I'm called, sometimes while I was a teacher or long before I started uh, becoming part of the media, to make a comment about things where they would need somebody from the black community to make a statement. I was always felt, I'm not really black, I'm not the right person to call. You need to call somebody with the experience
mm,
who has lived in this community, born in this community, who understands completely what it means to be black. I think I'm learning. I've learned a lot, quite a lot, but I really don't believe that I'm fully there
mm,
to be able to speak from that depth of experience where from the day you're born you realize that your blackness dictates to a large extent what it is or who you do become.
mm.
Yeah.
Um, you've been doing the work of telling the stories around these things for a long time, your own story and the stories of others through your journalism. Uh,
Yes.
and I'm wondering, At this point, what part of the reality of racial inequality do you wish that people would see, even if it's something that's been in front of our world, but it's like people see, but they don't really see.
Yes. It is the unknowing, the not knowing, because many times you go out and things happen and people ask you questions that you feel are inappropriate or things that, and you wonder, is it racism? Or is it just that you met somebody who is acting like a jerk, quote unquote, right?
Mm.
It's not knowing. That's really the hardest part. Because if everybody walked around with a tag that said, I'm a racist, don't talk to me, we really wouldn't have any issues. And imagine having children and trying to guide them,
Mm.
especially through these times. Whom do you tell them to avoid? Whom do you tell them to be very careful around? Because you really don't know who the good guys, who are the accepting, open-minded ones who are able to engage every human as a human, or who are the ones who are already with their preconceived notions of what black people are capable of. And that is, if your main goal is to protect the child from hurt and from injury, what exactly do you tell them?
Mm-hmm.
To me, in other words, to be able to empathize, put yourself in the shoes of the little child or the parent who is trying to teach the child about what it means to be black
Mm.
and how to navigate this very complex um, a problem.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like not knowing means needing to be always on guard and always on the alert.
Absolutely. Because you never know, you know. I mean, if we knew for sure, we wouldn't even be talking about this. Everybody would know. It's not knowing,
Mm-hmm.
like who is on your side, who has your back, who doesn't have your back, and always, as you said, having to be on guard and watching your back every single moment. And as an adult, I pretty much figure out uh, how to navigate these things, but a lot of people, especially young children, are unable to,
Yeah.
and that's the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a question here, and the question is what organizations are doing effective work to counteract the long-term effects of racism and inequality in our community?
There are many, many organizations, very, many, many, most of them are nonprofit that are working hard every day. And I think Peace Fresno, for instance, there are many. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. Many churches are actively engaged. God, what's the faith bit? I'm trying to remember the next well,
Faith Valley?
yes, that's also, but there are many, many organizations here that are out there and trying to promote peace and promote acceptance of everyone. They're actively engaged in their philanthropy and in going to these communities, providing after school care for children, tutoring, mentoring, providing opportunities for children. And even with this pandemic, which has hurt minority communities, many, many organizations have been out there also
Mm-hmm.
um, leading in feeding people, in providing the extra care and benefit through this very difficult period.
Mm-hmm. I was recently in talking with some people, and someone in the group said regarding the work of anti-racism, I don't know where to start. But the
Yeah,
cool thing is there are organizations and people locally who are already doing things. And
yeah,
so if I am new to that work, I don't have to figure it out from scratch because I can ask or I can work alongside or with or give my time to somebody else who.
Absolutely. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are people who have done that work and done it effectively,
Mhm,
and we just have to join them in whatever capacity that we can and try to help.
mhm. I have a question, which is what gives you hope and what frustrates you about the way the church engages with this issue?
Well, w- let me start by saying that we are very much uh, involved in our own religion. My husband and I were both raised in very strict Catholicism,
Mhm,
and we continue to practice. It gives me hope because I think that one of the reasons why a lot of people, African Americans, as well as blacks in Africa and in many places in the third world, the reason why we keep striving is because of that hope
mhm,
of eternal life, because of the hope, the promise that if you live your life in a certain way and you do certain things, that there is promise of grander things. Okay, that gives me a lot of hope. And
mhm,
also, when I look around me, there's hope in other people, in people, even within a Fresno community, who are going above and beyond to help other people. It doesn't even have to be in a racial kind of way. People who are economically challenged, people who are unemployed, people battling different kinds of addictions, people really doing more than is required of them. But also, what I find very troubling is that in Christianity, especially, um, the more Christian we seem to be, the more we fail to address, in my view, or take opportunity to address the inequalities, the vast inequalities that exist in our culture. And I'm not a communist or a socialist, and I don't believe in any of that. But I do believe that I don't think that God intended for us to be so unevenly divided. And I think that the church can certainly lead in cases of social justice, but it looks as if we sometimes go out of our way to avoid being in the position of leadership, to speak the truth. Okay. And I always, one of the essays when I was teaching composition that I loved to read was the letter that Martin Luther King Jr. wrote from Birmingham jail, that he wrote to 8 uh, people who are pastors, that he wrote to people who are supposed to be leaders, men of God, quote unquote, leaders in the church, when he made a case for racial justice, asking them that everyone deserves the same equality, at least in the eyes of God. That is the promise, and that's the one that I hold on to. It frustrates me no end when I'm sitting in church and I see that the priest goes around and around to avoid addressing issues of race, issues of immigration, and we sit there and we watch children being encaged or parents separated from their children and we do nothing. Then what is the call? What's the promise? If we can't even speak out against that is something that is so unnatural as separating mothers from their children. How then? What authority do we have to preach on issues of morality if we can't speak out about those things?
mhm,
I find it frustrating, and honestly, many times I say to my husband, "I'm not going to church anymore," but it reminds me, you are not doing it for another person.
mhm,
You don't do it. You don't go to church because of the pastor or because of the priest. You go to church to commune with others and with God.
mhm,
And you have to be able to look beyond those human frailties and look to the higher purpose.
Thank you for sharing about that. I really appreciate what you said too about like going that the church or that the person preaching sometimes it seems like they're going out of their way to avoid addressing these things. And I agree. If you are preaching from scripture, you have to go out of your way to
Yeah,
avoid addressing because they are explicitly addressed in the
yeah,
Bible. So
absolutely.
you have to try to go around that if that's what you're doing.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's very upsetting when you're sitting there, you know, and I write letters to the priest or to the bishop, and but ultimately, I will not. If there's salvation, it will not come through another human being. I understand it. It will come because of my own actions. So I will not be inactive and watch things go wrong. Yes.
I so enjoy talking to you about this.
It's,
Well, I think maybe as a final question. So, we are doing there's a Wednesday night discussion group that we're doing as part of this, where those of us who are watching these interviews are getting together. There's a Zoom link we have on our church website. Anyone can join. And I'm leading this discussion group
yeah,
Wednesday nights at 7. But
yeah.
the question I have for you is now that you know that I'm going to be in there leading that, if there's one thing that you could say, like, look, you guys, please make sure you talk about this thing. Like, don't forget to talk about this thing when you get together. Do you have thoughts about what that would be?
Uh, yes. I mean, I'll throw a few things out there.
Okay.
There's a question. I tell my students this little anecdote, and then I ask them a question, and it's a delicate way of going into the issue of multiculturalism and race and all that. That many years ago, my cousin, we lived in New Jersey. My cousin was getting married, and I was the maid of honor, and we went into a bakery to look at their cake, cake book to order wedding cake. And, it was the bakery also was a coffee shop. So there were lots of people coming in. It was in the morning, busy, busy. So they gave us the cake book and we're flipping through the book and saw many wedding cakes with decorations, but all the little people that sit on the cake, they were all white people. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
my cousin said to me, we should ask them if they have black people, and I said I'm not asking, and she said I'm not asking either. So eventually I said, well, you're the one getting married, you have to. And out of nowhere, with this room crowded with people, she says, do you have black people? And everyone everyone turned around and looked at us. Oh my God, I just wanted to die. And the guy said, what? And the guy behind the guy, what? What did you say? And she says, do you have black people? And of course, the guy misunderstood me. It's like, black people, you know. So we finally explained what it was.
Yeah.
No, they didn't have black people.
Mm.
We had to, if we wanted black people, we had to go buy our own black people for the cake.
God.
So that's the question, and I don't mean literally. You have a black a black person in your closet, right? Do you have other people? Do you step out of your comfort zone to mix, to integrate, to befriend, to engage, to embrace, to get to know people who live differently, people who speak differently, who worship differently, who have a different mindset. Do we open ourselves up for different experiences? Okay, so maybe that would be a good, ask them if they have Black people.
I will. That's a wonderful question. Both the anecdote and the serious question.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
for sharing, and it's been really fun for me, and I enjoy getting to know you.
Me too. I really, really have enjoyed this. It's a privilege. And anytime, and if this pandemic ever ends, I will take you up on the invitation to come and worship with you sometimes, and to meet some members of your congregation.
I
You
love.
know, I've really truly felt honored through this process.
Oh, good. Well, I'm getting some nice little thank you notes coming up in the chat. So there's other people thanking you that are watching this online. Um,
Yeah.
and then with that, just a reminder to everyone watching on the UPC website. If you follow this link that's on the video, it will go to the page we have that's about these conversations. But on the page that says racial inequality, there's a few links, and one of them is a link to this series where we're talking about through the Fresno Bee. So you can go to that link and look at those stories that Dympna and many others have written about what's happening here in Fresno, and the stories of Black people living in Fresno. And then also there's a link to give to the FresnoLand, which is independent policy journalism. It says that.
Yes.
Support the work that people like Dympna are doing. So you can give to the FresnoLand. And then there's also a link there to sign up to participate in the discussion, which is on Wednesday night at 7. And it's a Zoom room that I'm leading, and anyone is welcome that's watching to join in the discussion. And the teacher in me has to say that if you're feeling like really extra, you could also read that that letter that Dympna mentioned by Martin Luther King Jr., letter from a Birmingham jail.
Yes.
So for extra credit, but I'm not actually a teacher anymore, read Martin Luther King Jr. before you come to the discussion.
Yeah.
All right.